amazing. She's
Now we can.
Oh, okay, all right, well, here we go. So, call the meeting to order. And, you ready, Marty?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, the agenda, everybody have the agenda? Are there any changes people need to make?
Should we do a roll call?
Roll call, right.
Let's do a roll
All
call.
these people.
Hob is not here. Jacqueline, no. Marty, Mayo.
Yes.
Lisa, Pappas, here. Tim is a no. Will Weber.
Yes.
Liz Wiseman is here. Barry is here.
Okay, I guess I'd also like to welcome members of the public. Thank you for coming. Sorry we're just a little late starting, but we'll try to proceed as quickly as we can.
Apologies, as I walked out the door, I got this urgent phone call.
Yeah.
Always happens.
So, approval of the agenda. Do we have any comments, corrections, additions?
It looks good. I make a motion to approve.
Motion is made to approve by Lisa. We have a second.
I will second.
All right, thank you, Liz. All in favor of the agenda? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Agenda is approved. Minutes of the regular meeting 200 last month. Thank you, Liz, for preparing those. Any comments or corrections?
Perfect.
Yeah, it looked good. All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes.
So
Motion
moved.
to approve.
Okay, Marty, and support.
Support.
Okay. All in favor?
Will you have another member who would like to join?
Oh,
I'm slacking.
All in favor, Will?
yes. All in favor? I'm in favor, yes.
No, I'll just ask if
Sorry.
ask if everyone's in favor of approving the minutes.
Okay, we all in favor of approving minutes? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone
Okay.
opposed?
Yes, opposed also.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you for the person who just joined. We welcome comments from the public. We'll suggest a 3-minute time period if that's appropriate. Let's see, do we have to recognize from the chat, or can the members of the public who are present hear me now?
Yes, Will, this is Pam Boyd, and I would like to speak.
Okay, Pam, 3 minutes.
Thank you. First off, I would like to apologize again for not seeing the Zoom link at the bottom of the page. And since Hob and Jackie are not here, my question was, where is the location for their walk on May 7th? If somebody could get that information to me, that would be appreciated. And additional apologies to this committee, as I'll only be able to stay on for public comments, is I am a human barometer, and the wind gives me terrible migraines, such as now.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. I'd first like to express my appreciation to Barry Lonick and your presentation to the bot on Tuesday. Back almost 30 years ago, when the community farm of Ann Arbor was trying to get their land preserved, you showed to me your talents at getting things done. We farm members had to step up, but we did so under your direction. When I started attending the LPC meetings, I knew this committee was in the best of hands possible with you as its consultant. Thank you for your passion and what you do. Scio Township greatly benefits. The following portion of the message of my comments was spoken to the TAP meeting yesterday and also sent to Parks and Rec, as they had already had their meeting for the month. As you probably know by now, Administrator Rowley has resigned effective May 13th. You probably have also heard that Clerk Flintoff has sued the Board of Trustees, and that court date is coming up soon. This township is in a world of hurt. Are you awake? Have you been paying attention? How many Board of Trustees meetings have you been to? Why not more? If you had, you would have seen for the last 18 months what residents have been upset about. The recall efforts were just a bit too soon, as it may have turned out. Now we potentially have a laundry list of issues to recall. Maybe our township, though, would be better served if the state of Michigan took over. The Parks and Rec TAP manager position that has been needed is probably a kicked can somewhere down to a future board of trustees and not in your near future. This bot is going to need to quell its own fires having to do with don't we hire a new administrator? And who in the world would want to come to work for Scio Township, also known, thanks to the new attorney, Michael Homier, as dysfunctional, or in my words, dysfunction junction. Then we have the crisis in our finance department because the supervisor didn't take the well-educated, years of experience advice on how to fix the problem from the administrator rally. Why? Ego, stupidity, hubris. And we also have the clerk's lawsuit, which is probably a last-ditch effort to help her do her job. Don't understand how that could be? Do your job, pay attention. You all should voice your concerns to the supervisor. Several residents have already started calling for his immediate resignation. How many more articles will be written about our dysfunctional township? Wake up. Our township is on fire, and committees are roasting weenies. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Are there comments from any other members of the public? Hearing none, we'll proceed. Our somewhat skeletal commission here today. Planning, do we have any reports of anybody at the Planning Commission? Do we know anything about what happened? Marty, are you tuned in at all?
Am I?
Yeah, have you any awareness of what the Planning Commission did in the past?
No, but I expect that Jacqueline will show up pretty soon.
Yeah, maybe we can catch that
Yes.
later. Parks and Recreation, which is Hob, and he's not here. We'll make note, Liz, of our need to get in touch with him about the hike and get that information to Pam.
Sure, I will.
Okay. Trails and Pathways, Liz, what's going on
I
there?
do have a report, and the meeting was yesterday. It was super interesting. This is my third meeting, so I'm really enjoying it. The Scio Ridge Upland Drive neighborhood that I talked about last time, they are talking with an engineer Washtenaw Engineering, I guess, who will begin to do drawings before a public meeting to kind of discuss. So that's in a very preliminary stage for the sidewalks to make that neighborhood safer. We had a really interesting presentation from Ann Arbor Transportation Authority. It's called the Ride 2045, and that made me think of how old I'm going to be when it's finished, which is in a wheelchair. But anyway, it was very interesting. It's their long-term plan, and it does touch on Scio Township, mostly around the perimeter, but they are open to discussions with us about as needs in the township change. Then we should be aware that TAP has its own millage renewal for this November ballot. So it is really important for us to get for the board to act on our millage request and get that on the November ballot.
Has the board already approved their millage?
No, they're not as far along as we are. We have, offered the board recommended language and things like that. But we need to move, make sure that moves forward as much as we can. I was hoping that Jacqueline would be here to hear that.
She's on her way. She
Okay,
just texted
good
me.
deal. The last thing is that the board has not approved funding for the PROS plan for Carlisle Wortman to begin work on the PROS plan. So Chris Nordstrom was at the meeting yesterday. He said, I can't start. The funding hasn't been approved. And that is not something you do in 8 weeks. It's a process. So
PROS,
really,
PROS stands for
It's,
Parks and Recreation and Open
Parks
Space.
Parks and Represent, isn't that right, Barry?
Parks,
Open
Recreation, and Open
space.
Space.
Yes, and so that is, as I understand it, it's a 5-year plan that is the basis for any kind of grants
Yeah.
that we get from federal and state grants, so it's really key to what Parks is able to do.
And the hang-up is
The
board approval?
The board has not acted to approve funding to begin revision of that plan for the next 5 years. So it's at the board level, but it's a concern because it has to be done by the fall, to get it in place for the
Funding.
next 5 years. Yes.
The state of Michigan's Natural Resources Trust Fund, which also administers the federal land and water conservation fund dollars that come to Michigan, has a single annual deadline of April 1st of the year. And to be eligible for those funds, you have to have an approved plan by the staff of the trust fund, which are employees of the Department of Natural Resources. And you have to get that into them, I think, at the end of the year for them to review it and say, yes, this is a plan that we approve that will then make you eligible for the April 1 deadline.
So this is very relevant to us in our request for funding through that program.
We've only used the trust fund once, but that's certainly something that we could tap into again. But certainly it's also available for development of parks, and pathways, all that kind of stuff.
Right, trails and
It's
things like
land
that.
acquisition.
So it's important for what we do. So
Yeah.
again, that's at the board level. There needs to be some action on both that and the millage.
All right.
Just later. And so that's my.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So the last item is Board of Trustees. Well, Pam's given us a little bit of a rundown there. And maybe we'll hear more from Jacqueline when she arrives. We'll postpone that for the time being. Let's go to old business then. Candidates for the Rents property purchase and associated with that administrative fees related to the buy, protect, sell process and concerns about delay of federal funding. Barry, you want to tell us a little bit about what you know there?
Sure. Let's start with the status of the purchase of the conservation easement and the related purchases of the land after the easement's in place, and then also the purchase of the 9 acres on the north side of the township for a future fire station and water storage facility. We are under contract with the Wren's estate to close that easement purchase, actually all 3 purchases, by the end of April, the 30th, which is actually a Saturday. So I had been shooting for April 29th closing for all 3 of these pieces. And submitted to, and we have an unprecedented 5 funding partners in this. The City of Ann Arbor Greenbelt Program, Washtenaw County Parks through the Natural Area Preservation Program, Scio, of course, the State of Michigan through the Agricultural Preservation Fund, and then the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. And the latter of that is contributing $868,550. It's a substantial amount of money. And of course, there are many things that have to be done over the course of a project, and all of those were accomplished, and a package of information was sent to the federal program coordinator on February 22nd of this year. Generally, it takes up to 60 days for them to review all of that and give us the go-ahead, fill out the last forms and get approvals and signatures and so forth. So it was more than, it was 70 days in advance in essence. And so I was hopeful that everything would come together by the end of April. There was the annual deadline for that program, as well as for the other federal program that we have some involvement with, the Resource Conservation Partnership Program, RCPP. That I believe was March 11th of this year. And I didn't submit anything from Scio for that, but I did for other communities. And the program coordinator received all of those And I had a couple more communications with him shortly thereafter. And then I started following up and asking about the RENS project and, had he received things? Had the appraisal been reviewed and approved? Had the deed, the easement, been approved? And what the status was with all these other forms and so forth that need to be completed. And didn't get a response, not by email, not by phone. And so I started contacting some of my colleagues and saying, heard from Brian lately. And I think it was Remy Long from the Greenbelt program that indicated that Brian had taken a leave of absence. Shortly after that March 11th deadline, I never got any notice about that. Apparently Remy did. And subsequently found out that it sounds like it's for 8 weeks. So that we were already a couple of weeks into that 8 weeks by the time I found out about it. And so I'm frantically calling other people and saying, what do you recommend doing here? Other programs from around the state. So as of this past Monday, there is a person at the state office of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service agency that has been assigned to follow up on these projects. And I impressed upon him, somebody that I crossed paths with, I'm going to say probably a dozen years ago. I think he filled in between the prior coordinator and the current coordinator for a few months or maybe a bit longer. So we had some knowledge of each other at least. So I contacted him right away on Monday and said, I got a closing in 2 weeks, are we going to be able to pull this off? And to his credit, he dove into everything and sent me some stuff and I responded, but said ultimately, I think it was yesterday, that they just were not going to be able to pull everything together by the end of this month.
In order to deliver the check for the closing.
And also to even approve the easement deed. I mean, one of the things that Will and I talked about a few days ago was we generally request that the federal funds, just like the state and county and Greenbelt funds and our funds, are wired to the title company. So we make the payment and then we're done with it at this point. The other option with the federal program is for the entity, Scio Township, to cover the share, the federal share, and then seek reimbursement for those funds subsequently. And that is possible to do. It does take a little bit of time, and obviously that means that more of our money is not available for other things. We do have that money in the account at this point, so that could have been done. However, that is only possible to do if all the other approvals, including the deed, have come through. So we can't go to closing and cover their share without the other approvals.
Which is dependent on their approving the deed.
Yes, and other things too. Brian Thomas has been the longtime coordinator there, and things change, so I can't keep track of it. He has a difficult time, I think, keeping track of it sometimes. But ultimately, he comes through and says, here's the forms you need to get signed, and here's this, make sure these numbers are correct and so forth. I depend on him for that. I don't have adequate knowledge to be able to produce those things myself. So we're kind of stuck. So I notified our attorney, Mr. Scio, about this a couple of days ago. He and I spoke earlier today, and he is in the process now of drafting amendments to each of the 3 purchase agreements that we have. And he'll send those to me today or tomorrow, and I'll review them, and then we will pursue that with the estate.
Amendments concerning the date of closure?
Yes, that's the one change that we would be seeking from them. The interim person at NRCS thought that 30 days extension would be sufficient. That is by the end of May that we could close. And that's basically 45 days from now. I think that's enough time. I'm hesitant to ask for anything more than a 30-day extension. As you've probably heard before, the estate's attorney has been a challenge to deal with. And I hope that he will be receptive, and we'll go from there. So sometime in the next couple of days here, Mr. Scio will be contacting the attorney and saying, look, this is out of our hands. We have no control over this. It's an unexpected circumstance.
So Scio will handle the negotiations with the state.
We have all of the money already committed and ready to go. It's just this one piece that needs to go through this approval process, and it's got hung up because somebody
Take a leave of
has taken a
absence.
leave. Yeah.
Take leaves of absence are sort of a chronic problem these days.
Yeah, and I indicated to Joe that if there's any objection, that there are a number of things that I have done that are really the estate's responsibilities. For example, before I came over here today for the meeting, I met a couple of gentlemen from Ann Arbor Well Drilling Company, because in addition to the lack of a septic field on the property, which is a seller's responsibility to have one installed or to put money into escrow for future installation, there was some type of a well on the property attached to the house that we thought was a cistern, but wanted somebody with experience to clarify that. Because if it was a well, then it needs to be properly closed in order to meet the health department standards and for them to give approval for the sale of the property. Unfortunately, it was a cistern, so it does not need to be closed. There's a couple of things that need to be done, but they're minor. But that's really a seller's responsibility, and because the estate's personal representative, the daughter of Mr. Renz, has been out of state for some time now, I've stepped in and done things like that for them, and the cleanup of the debris that was on the property, which was substantial. I went to the property twice and met with the contractors out there. And pointed out where there was more trash that needed to be picked up, and crawled into some scrubby woods and pulled stuff out and said, there's more over there that you need to grab. Spent a couple of hours doing that. So we've put a good faith effort forth to support them, and I would hope that they would respond favorably to a fairly minor request.
And the cost of doing that will be debited to the payment that they will receive in the settlement?
The cost of?
It's a seller's responsibility to clean the property, right?
Yes, and they're paying for that
Directly?
now, yes.
Oh, okay.
It's not coming from proceeds, they're covering those costs now. And any costs associated with dealing with this well, or, and so forth. So they're covering that now, so they'll get their full payment at closing. But in order to get health department approval for closing, they have to show that it's not a well, it's a cistern, and we have to put money into escrow for the septic field going forward.
So just to be 100% clear, there is no doubt that when all these I's are dotted and T's are crossed, we would get the federal money. I mean, nothing in this hang-up is putting the funds into question?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, it's just,
Time.
and paperwork and bureaucracy.
Okay, but it's not, none of it is a threat to the funding.
No, the funding is 100% committed. It's just, the federal program has a process to go through, various steps, forms to be filled out and signed and so forth, and that just, came to a standstill when Brian left on his break, his leave. So that's where that stands at this point. I'm proceeding as if we will continue with that closing. It's just going to be delayed beyond a couple of weeks. Anything else on that for the time being?
That's the federal.
That's just the federal funds. That's correct.
Do you have more on rents, other elements of the?
We do.
Okay.
So I think the next thing so that obviously impacts the sale of the property after the easement's in place as well. We had lined up American Farmland Trust, and Brian Bordage there is the lower part of the screen.
Welcome, Brian.
Welcome, Brian.
Brian's been my primary contact, but I've been in contact with a number of other AFT staff people here recently just to work everything out. There was last week an approval by their Land Preservation Commission equivalent, which is it's a national organization, so there's people from all over the country that were on that call, and they did approve their purchase of the property. And the working idea before we have this delay arise is that we would be assigning the purchase agreement that we have currently with the estate to sell the property, or actually to purchase the property after the easement's in place. So right now, Scio Township is shown as the purchaser of the fee simple interest after the easement's in place. And Mr. Fazio and I have been working on an assignment document to assign that to another party. And that was intended to be American Farmland Trust. We may or may not need them at this point because of this delay, and momentarily we'll get to our review of the proposals that were submitted to buy the property. And so given that 30 days, we may not need AFT's involvement in this. We can just move straight to the new purchaser. But in the meantime, AFT did act, and they are committed and available to do that should we need them to do that.
I think we all appreciate AFT's leverage here to make this deal happen, because there you were to backstop it and help us. I don't think it would have happened without the assurance that AFT gave us. So
Yes.
thank you very much.
Greatly
for that
appreciate
support.
it. And they, Brian and many others have put a fair bit of effort into this. And so in some sense, I regret not being able to involve them if we don't, because they have really come through for us. But on the other hand, they're happy to say, if you don't need us, that's cool. We'll just, we're happy to be here and work with you if you need us. Regardless of whether we involve AFT or not, we eventually want to move this property to a new buyer. And as you all know, we had a request for proposals on the Township website. And that was also made known by other means, including an email list that I've been generating for a decade of people who've expressed interest in buying land, and just other interested parties who I know forwarded it on to other people. I did also list it with the Washtenaw County Conservation District and MSU Extension, and on the Michigan, I think it's called Michigan Farm Link at this point, website. So I think fairly broadly distributed. And we had a deadline of March 31 for proposals. And by that deadline, we had 7 proposals submitted. At our last meeting, there was a committee of 3 people that were appointed to review those proposals. That was Lisa and Liz and Jim Logan, along with myself. We met twice, and everybody clearly thoroughly reviewed the proposals that were received. We had some terrific conversation about them. At the first meeting, we narrowed it down to what we thought were the top 3 candidates. And then in a second meeting, we ranked them in terms of the priorities of the committee members. And that was not an easy task. All 3 of these proposals were very strong. They were folks who had existing farming experience. They all had proposals that were including some regenerative agricultural activities. That was one of the things that we indicated in the RFP, was that we wanted to support sustainable agricultural endeavors and ones that would be producing food for human consumption. And all of them had this, all the top 3. The other ones, had some very positive elements too. And by the way, I sent all 7 of those proposals to you all earlier this afternoon, so you can see what everybody submitted for that. But in the end, there was consensus amongst the 4 of us that there was one that really stood maybe just not head and shoulders, above the rest of them. And so that is the information that I provided to you ahead of the meeting. In terms of the top ranking proposal, this is, of course, subject to the LPC's discussion. And ultimately, what we're seeking today is a recommendation to the Board of Trustees so that whether that is in the assignment of the current purchase agreement from Scio Township as the purchaser to this party, or that it goes from Scio to American Farmland Trust, and then AFT would be the owner of the property for some period of time, a couple of weeks or a month or so, and then they would be the ultimate seller of the property after the easement's in place to this other party. And in our many long discussions with Brian and others at AFT, they were very appreciative of the process that we created for this, and we're very confident in our ability to sort through applications and select a good candidate. Indicated to Brian and others, just the types of proposals that we received. So they're very happy to say, we're if they are the interim purchaser of the property, that they're comfortable with having it be passed on to this new party. The one that we thought had the most merit was from a gentleman by the name of Mike Vestergaard. He currently runs a business on Wagner Road, just a couple of miles, about 2.5 miles south of the Wren's farm. It's located on conserved land, and he has a storefront. I know some people have been to the storefront. I have not personally. But they do sell the beef that is raised on site. It's a pasture operation, as well as I believe there's hogs and chickens that they also sell there. Their proposal wants to expand their business. They are doing very well, but need more land. And most beef that is available in grocery stores these days is raised on feedlots in Kansas and places like that, and fed grains, which is not what cattle guts are made to do, and a much more sustainable means of raising cattle is doing it on pasture and feeding hay to them in the winter months. And that's what Mike's doing on his property, and proposes to do that on this property as well. Do you folks want to add anything to that? Lisa or Liz?
I would like to add that the proposals that we got were really outstanding. I was just blown away by all of them. It was a really amazing learning experience for me, but a lot of it has to do with this particular property, the size of it, for example, and the most suitable use for this particular property. I was glad that we have other properties coming down the road for other applicants, and I hope that they will apply as those become available, because it was hard to pick one of the 7. They were really outstanding.
We tried several different ways of sort of how do we decide? And we did. Lisa produced this wonderful table so we could all score each of the properties on, I think it was 6 different criteria, and a 1 to 5, and that was helpful. But I mean, they were all real close.
They were very close, but we were diligent about following the RFP and developing a survey that had a weighted scale, a Likert scale, based specifically. And some of the weight went toward what is really supporting the public good and direct access to food. And are we serving the community? So the public good and the community good, the environment. So the Likert scale was very helpful.
Yeah, very much so. And again, I wanted to thank Liz and Lisa, and also Tim, who's not with us today. you all did a terrific job.
We were a good team.
Absolutely, yeah. Read all the things, we're very thoughtful about it. Lisa created these great surveys, and that's where we landed. So that's the one, each one of those 7 proposals submitted basically would turn into a one-page PDF. That's what I sent to everybody earlier today. And then when I sent out my report to you yesterday, I included just the one full proposal from Vestergaard. But I'm happy to share any of the other information if you want to see what the other candidates submitted. And as Liz said, we're fortunate that we have a couple of properties that are already submitted to the program, and we'll be discussing that more in closed session today because we don't have purchase agreements on those properties at this point. But those provide opportunities for some of these other candidates. And so I'm hopeful that we will find places for other folks here in Scio. Again, to echo Liz's comments, all 3 of them were just, those 3 in particular. Other ones were good too, but those 3 in particular, we just thought, God, these are all great. How do we get them here? Good. Yes?
Can we be intentional about reaching back out to them when we do the next process? Or if
Yes.
we finalize either of these other 2 properties in the pipeline to just,
Absolutely.
or even if they're not selected this round, just in informing them of that, just say there are other properties coming up,
Yes.
please keep an eye out.
Oh, right, good point.
Absolutely.
So do we have access to, you work with the secretary that sends out letters on Scio letterhead and all that?
I generally
You do it
those
all the
things.
time,
Yeah,
okay.
I've got access to the letterhead.
And will these other candidates be entered in our land link database so that that they'll be kept aware of any other opportunities besides ours as well that may come up?
One way or another, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Most of them, I think, maybe all of them, I've added to my email list. But we'll once again utilize the Conservation District and MSU Extension and FarmLink and any other avenues that we
Okay.
come up with. So they'll get notice of other opportunities. So if there's any questions, we're happy to answer that. But ultimately, what we want to get today is a recommendation from the LPC that we will take to the Board of Trustees on the April 26th meeting to say this is to whom we think this property should be sold after the easement's in place for their consideration.
Was there some matter, Barry, concerning possible administrative fees that are involved
Yes.
in the buy, protect, sell process that wouldn't have been involved otherwise?
Yes, so we did state in the RFP that, and it was actually at Jacqueline's encouragement when we started this process, some time ago. This is an unusual undertaking for Scio Township and really for anybody. It's not the normal course of due diligence and so forth that we do for any project where we, have deeds or easements drafted and reviewed by legal counsel and survey and environmental and appraisal. All those kinds of things are things that we undertake and pay for. This is on top of all of that. And so we stated in the RFP that up to 10% of the land value could be charged as an administrative fee for us to conduct this process. I didn't keep track of my hours along the way, but it was not inconsequential. There were some smaller costs, but it was mostly, I would say, probably my time that was involved with that. And so the suggestion that we've come up with is to, rather than 10% of the purchase price of the land, which is $280,000, that we charge 5% of that for this purpose to cover our additional costs for operating, this process, which would go back into the millage account, for future use. It's not like it's going to go in a general fund or something. And so that would be $14,000 in this case.
So 10% is being 5%, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the suggestion that we have is that rather than 10% of 280, we charge 5% of 280,
Okay.
which is 14,000.
I think at the time that I suggested 10%, the thinking was if we were gonna be doing our own little mini land link, that we might actually need significant staff time. And by doing an individual RFP, we've cut down on that.
Yes.
And so I think 5% seems to make sense.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have to be really clear to our partners that this is not a money-making proposition for us. We're really only trying to cover the costs over and beyond what we would normally be doing. And I think the 5%, I mean, like you said, you haven't kept track of all your costs, but I mean, that seems like it's probably pretty reasonable to be
Yes,
starting
I
that.
think so too.
Okay.
And I have communicated this to our local funding partners, at least, and they've expressed no objection to that.
And Vestergaard also is aware.
Not of that particular figure, but it was in the RFP that we could charge that amount. So I indicated in the RFP that in worst case scenario, if it was a full 10%, that'd be $28,000 on top of the $280,000 of land value. And then we've agreed with the Wren's estate to split the cost for the septic field, which is something that is a seller's responsibility. The last time that we requested an extension, that was what their attorney came back with. So what are you going to give us? And we agreed to split that cost 50-50 up to $25,000. So the RFP stated that it's $280 plus potentially $28,000 plus potentially $25,000 for a total of $333,000. So if we charge 5%, it's less, obviously. And then I just got the proposal for the septic field before I came into the meeting today, and it's less than that. So the actual purchase price with our administrative fee and half of the septic cost will be $310 or something like that.
This is amazing.
Yeah, for 100 acres
Property like this.
of land,
Yeah.
a paved public road, a third of a mile from the Ann Arbor city limits, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's really a bargain, so.
There's a similar property just down, well, I guess it's on Z, but it's almost $1 million.
Yeah, and this one, of course, is a $3.5 million project, but by buying the conservation easement and splitting off the 9 acres for the public services, we're making this land available for incredibly reasonable price for, an established agricultural operation to basically, transfer some of its endeavors and expand their operation going forward. So.
What is the state of Mr. Vestergaard's awareness of his probable chosen status?
I indicated to everybody that inquired, including Mr. Vestergaard, that I was going to make no statement about that until today. So whether he's tuned in or not, I don't know, but I was going to inform him. There's the committee, ranked them in order of what they thought were the best ones were, but it's subject to the LPC's consideration and recommendation to the board. And we're doing this obviously in public session, so it becomes known at that point. It's still subject to the board's approval in a couple of weeks, but I would anticipate that they would support the recommendation from the LPC.
So are you looking now for a motion of recommendation to the board?
Yes.
All right.
Can I just briefly ask a little bit more? Liz, it sounded
Could you
like...
speak up a little bit, Jacqueline?
Sorry, Liz, it sounded like you thought that the Vestergaard proposal was the best with this particular piece of property, even though you thought all were strong. Could you just maybe share with us a little? It sounded like those last three were very, very good. How did you land on this one?
I would say the size of the operation, the number of animals for the acreage, the way that he was able to use all of the property at the outset, those were some of the factors.
So
The way
the
that
others would have to
the
grow
way
into
that he's and again, the top three, they were very close, but the ability to immediately take action, get it up and running, get the operation up and running, having the capital to do what they need to do to get it going right away. It's a big piece of property, so that's why the proposal that could use the whole of it well, that made a difference.
The other closest proposal, he had only farmed 30 acres, or 35, yeah.
And we thought could ramp up. I mean, the proposal was very solid. in
It was a
every regard.
solid,
It's
yeah.
excellent, yeah.
But it just, Vestergaard, we thought, is doing a similar kind of operation on a similar sized property and was more easily transferable. But that's one of the ones that we thought, damn, we want those people somewhere in this
Yeah,
township. They
yeah.
got a great deal going, and
That's exactly right, yes.
And they want to be resident farmers, so we really like that.
All right, can I ask a question? I'm on Zoom. Yeah, so we're one of the proposals that was not chosen, but I'm curious. So Vestergaard, he's already farming this much land. Is he proposing then to leave his old property, or how is it that he's ready to occupy the 100 acres? Is he expanding or is he moving?
expanding.
Expanding.
And properly, we don't engage the public during this part of the meeting.
Sorry about that.
But it's okay. I'm happy to answer that question, but I'm happy to answer other questions that you may have. Feel free to contact me, later on today or tomorrow to learn more.
But as long as we're corresponding, which proposal were you?
We're the ones who have farmed on 35 acres. Solomon Gardens.
Yeah, that's the yours. Yeah, and you had a very strong proposal.
I'm also confused because you talk about a benefit of his being that he's going to be a resident farmer, and that's exactly what we said too. So I'm not seeing those as differentiating factors, I guess.
Let's chat later on or tomorrow.
Yeah, stay on the idea. We'll come up with more properties to consider later. Well, can we move on at this point and make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees? Someone would like to make a motion? One of the committee members, maybe?
I will make a motion to recommend the Wren's property. I'm sorry, to recommend that the Wren's property be offered to Mark Vestergaard. But maybe we include also with the stipulation that we keep the other especially this number 2 finalist in top of mind for the next properties that come up, because it was so close and we felt so strongly about them based on the RFP. So we would recommend Vestergaard and keep the second place person in mind for the next properties.
Okay, we have a second.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Further discussion of the decision to recommend the Vestergaard property to the Board of Trustees for our select new occupant?
Have we outlined our selection criteria? We presented that to the board, correct?
Yep. Yep, we
On the
had
website, right?
a draft of the RFP that got transferred onto the website. We had our evaluation criteria, which, as Lisa stated, we relied on heavily. When Lisa was creating her survey, she went to that and said, these are the things that we stated explicitly that we're seeking in this. And so we scored them, on that basis.
So I think when this goes to the Board of Trustees, we need to make sure to attach those 2 things as well.
Gotcha.
Liz, can you summarize the motion or restate the motion as you have it?
There's a motion to recommend to the Township Board of Trustees that the Wren's property be offered for sale to, be offered to Mike Vestergaard for purchase. That's not very artfully put, but.
No, that's artfully put.
Yeah,
Is that-
okay.
is that
And with the
adequate?
stipulation that we keep the other people in mind for next available properties.
Do the RFPs have numbers or anything identifying them other than just the name? Should we specify RFP number or whatever?
It was just, online, it was just the Wren's property RFP.
Okay. So, but the individuals who submitted RFPs, those were not numbered or anything as they came in. So we wouldn't have to say Vestergaard, RFP number X.
No.
No,
Okay.
no.
I would like to make the stipulation separate from the
Okay, good
motion,
idea.
because I think
It's cleaner.
as a committee of the LPC, we felt very strongly that that the other applicants for this property should have the chance to bid on the next available property. It was a very, very difficult decision, and lots of discussion and time went into it. And so our final decision was for Vestergaard, but it was very close, I would just like to say.
Makes sense.
All right,
So then the motion is to recommend to the board that the Ren's property be offered to Michael Vestergaard for purchase.
all right.
There's a motion.
Everybody clear on that?
Yeah. Second by Marty.
So it's been made and seconded, we've had a discussion. You want to call the roll then on the vote?
Could I just, I'm just feeling like maybe we need to specifically in the motion refer to after consideration of all proposals submitted through the RFP,
Yep, you're right.
just
Sure.
so that it's clear what our
Sure.
process was.
So do we need to vote on the
Maybe
amendment
all.
then first?
Well, it can be accepted as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
I accept.
Any problem with that, Lisa?
No, I mean, that makes sense. I amend my motion based on meeting the RFP criteria, and after reducing it to the top 3 candidates, and then going through a second round of consideration based on RFI criteria specified in the RFP, we recommend Vestergaard to the Board of Trustees for the Ren's property. That's much better, thanks, Jen.
I just think.
You got
You're
that?
so good.
No, you're right, that's a great change.
Okay, so I think we're still, motion made as amended and seconded. Anything more to clarify what we're going to recommend? All comfortable?
Do we
Try
need
the
to-
roll
Do we
again.
need to call the roll on this,
Yes.
or is it
This
roll
is
call?
probably a good
Okay.
one to call the roll on.
Jacqueline,
Yes.
Marty,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Will,
Yes,
and I am a yes.
okay, unanimous vote. Thank you for the work that you put in, committee
Yeah,
members.
really great work by these folks. And I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Mary Gillis, who is the Township webmaster, I guess, or mistress, whatever you call that, who was the one that took the written, Word document that I had created and made it into an RFP and embedded all of the different pieces that we had, the survey, the environmental, the draft easement, all that kind of stuff. So interested parties could just go and click on those things and see them or download them if they wanted to. And then she created a survey form of her own so that people could just fill things out and produce those one-pagers and then attach other things. It was extraordinarily helpful for me and I think for all of us as well. So Mary, if you're watching or listening, thank you for that.
So for a first time through, we've created a model that's probably going to work for us in the future.
I thought it worked amazingly well, actually.
Yeah. I do have a couple little tweaks,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, kudos to all of you, and we're not quite over the finish line yet, but we're approaching it.
It's a
in the
major
lead, I
step
think,
in the
right?
process.
All right, good. Anything more on Ren's at this point? Oh, good.
That's plenty.
Mr. Chairman, this is Brian Burdage with American.
Yes, Brian.
Farm. I just would like to make a couple comments in this regard, but I want to recognize your process. So if you'd like me to wait until the end of the meeting, I'm happy to do that.
Brief comments? If they're extensive, we can wait till after, but if you want to.
No, just brief comments on behalf of American Farmland Trust. I want to let you all know that myself and my colleagues have been incredibly impressed by the process that the township has adopted for their Buy, Protect, Sell program, not to mention the mere fact that you have elected to do so, which is something that we've been encouraging both land trusts and public programs to do because we see it as a necessary tool and an increasingly necessary tool to protect some of our prime farmlands. I also want to thank Barry and all of you for the very thoughtful process in considering a purchaser. I think you're fortunate to have many growers who are looking to expand their operations in the township and who are providing, direct market goods to your residents and others in the region. And finally, just want to say that we've been very glad to be able to play this collaborative role, whether we end up in the chain of title ultimately or not. We're very thankful that Barry reached out to us and that we were able to step in a manner that we think was helpful in keeping this project alive. And our council and staff will continue to work diligently with yours as well as Barry to do everything we can to see this through to its successful conclusion. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good, good.
Thank you.
Very appreciative. Okay, I think we can move on at this point. Millage renewal. Now, we can't discuss strategy of millage renewal here, but I understand that there is some concern about the need to rework our language.
And maybe we should go back now that Jacqueline's here to the BOT report.
Yeah,
And
Jacqueline.
Planning Commission also, if you have anything to say for Planning Commission.
Have the rules changed since the last millage? That's what I kind of got the sense of from Jessica's note.
Have the rules changed?
The rules for the difference between a renewal and a new millage. I think the confusion that I got as I was hearing the process, and I got a direct inquiry from Jessica, about wanting to sit down and work through the language with an attorney so that we don't violate any rules, but apparently to maybe see if circumstances have changed and maybe we should not just go with updating the language of the past proposal, which was successfully renewed based on the previous proposal.
I have reached out to our attorney to clarify whether, so I think that the issue that came up is there's the millage renewal, and then there's the restoration to the original full 0.5 mil funding that has over the years been gradually reduced by the Headley Act amendment. So that would be the restoration. So there's the millage renewal component for which if we do that, you have to have the exact same purpose and intent. And then there's the restoration of the full amount of the millage. Now, there seems to be some lack of clarity about whether that would have to be two separate questions on the ballot, the renewal and the restoration of full funding, previous funding, or whether that can be done as one question. I think the clerk is raising separate questions around trying to expand the or use within the purpose of the millage our general reference to protecting water to come up with a way to use this as a potentially to purchase properties within the contaminated plume, Gelman contaminated plume. And we'd have to look carefully at the language to see whether that actually fits the original intent. My thinking is that wasn't what was intended, but maybe if the wording is broad enough, you could include that in the umbrella. So that's a question of if we had to change, if the original wording could be interpreted broadly, that wouldn't have to be a change, so that could still be a millage renewal. Another concern is about administrative costs, but that was not actually language in the millage itself, the millage language, but that was in the ordinance that we did to enact the millage. So I actually think that question of administrative costs is a little bit separate, although that has been put in other millages such as parks and pathways. So I'm seeing from your expression, Will, I maybe haven't actually clarified things.
Well, Jacqueline, maybe you were more familiar with the likely processes here. I mean, I felt a certain concern going in. I thought the Board of Trustees at the meeting on Tuesday was going to approve the ability to place the millage on the ballot, and I provided her with the language, which was what we had used before, with a suggestion that we had to be careful about changing it in such a way that it becomes a new millage and therefore a new tax. Now, what I'm hearing from you is maybe there's a desire to reinterpret the nature of the millage to cover things that maybe weren't covered before, and that we need to involve an attorney, and Jessica, and I don't know who else. It sounds like we're stringing out the process here of actually making a decision to put this on the ballot so that we can then, through the committee that's been constituted, prepare for promoting the millage in a circumstance where there's certain political volatility to any kind of proposal.
I was not aware that you had provided potential millage language because that did not make its way into the Board of Trustees packet. And one concern expressed by the clerk was that we did not yet have language that had been vetted by the attorney. So if you have language that you were proposing, if you want to send it to me, I will also run that by the attorney, as well as this question of whether it can be one question or two.
Well, I sent it within an hour or two of Jessica's request for it, and maybe she didn't see it in time, I don't know, but I'm surprised that there was no reference to the fact that, a copy was available to her.
It's been 2 meetings too since we recommended that millage, hasn't it?
Yes, it has been.
2 meetings since we recommended that that be on the board, and we used the same language. Barry provided the language that we had used in the past, and then we added the restoration part of it. So, I was surprised that it wasn't put on the ballot, I guess, last night, because we
On the agenda.
put on the agenda and approved for the ballot last night, because we don't have a lot of time to generate materials to promote it, that sort of thing. Not that the LPC was doing that, but our committee. Yeah, Barry?
The request that came to Will from Jessica was on Monday, I believe. So it wasn't time to get into the board packet, but he did respond to that. And just for reference, the language in the original 2004 proposal, and then the 2012 renewal of that is, shall the Township of Scio permanently preserve farmland, open space, wildlife habitat, scenic views, and protect drinking water sources and the water quality of rivers and streams, and provide new parks, recreational opportunities, and so forth. So that's the piece of it I think is up for debate in terms of interpretation. The drinking water, protect drinking water sources and the water quality of rivers and streams.
Well, maybe it's up for.
That's interesting because presumably Gilman plume contaminated water wouldn't be a drinking water source.
Correct. Right.
So I apologize. I did not have that language on me. I had the 2004, but I had not seen the 2012. And by the time I was able to think about getting this copied and distributed to the members, I didn't have the time to do that for this meeting. I think there was, unfortunately, a little bit of lack of clarity around the process. So I appreciate that it's a delay, and I'll do my best to keep it moving forward.
And the language was exactly the same from 2004 to 12, other than
the dates.
The dates of the 10 years. It's inclusive from 2014 to 2024. That was different than the 2004 ballot. And the word renewal was placed in there somewhere because it was a renewal of the previous one.
So it seems, if I understand it, Jacqueline, we're dealing with the meaning of restoration and renewal with basically substantially the same, or exactly the same intent. Is that what we're trying to play with here?
Yes.
And so if we did use exactly the language updated for the current period of time, it would cover, we certainly are looking at a renewal process, and the restoration, I guess we should know how much is involved in restoration. I mean, updating it to current taxation process or Headley or whatever it is,
So there-
versus the bureaucracy we're entangling ourselves with in order to get the process done.
Are we down to 0.43? Is that what I remember hearing effectively?
It's, yeah, I mean, we've been at it for 18 years now, and so the original 0.5 mils has been reduced by Headley to something lower than that, 0.48 something, I'm guessing. I don't know what that figure is.
I mean, it is real money, but yes, to what extent is that worth a delay?
So one concern is the language. The other is the process of getting to the acceptable language that the Board of Trustees will approve. And, you know, I was concerned to understand that Jessica wants to be involved she wants to get an attorney involved here. And she seemed quite adamant about not being willing to approve it for the ballot until all of that is worked out. So, I mean, are we likely to have an opportunity to do this before the next Board of Trustees meeting? Or are we looking at a more extended process with respect to what you understand the board now is going to require?
I can't say
Can't
for
say.
sure. I can say that, as I said, I've reached out to the attorney to clarify the process, and I don't know more at this moment.
Yeah, I would say that it's typical, and I would say even essential, that there may be a recommendation from the board to place any proposal on the ballot, whether it's new or a renewal, to float that language by or have that language created by, council, to say this is, there's certain requirements, for what you say in a millage. What's the rate? What are the years that it applies, and so forth. So have the attorney say, yep, this covers everything. That's proper.
Okay, would you like me to talk with Jessica about facilitating the process of developing the language in consultation with the attorney? Would that be an appropriate thing for me to do? That would maybe help?
Why don't we talk about that?
I'm sorry, why?
Why don't we talk about
Okay.
next steps?
All right.
Let me just ask though, is there an interest in expanding the intent of that language to include cleaning up polluted water?
That's a concern.
Because
I don't-
on its face, I hear that language and that's not what it says to me. And it says that we are preserving drinking water and protecting the resources that we have.
So I don't think the intent is to clean up water, but to maybe tweak priorities so that we preserve priorities that might not otherwise be high priority if they're in areas where the aquifer is contaminated. And the example being used is the Knights of Columbus property on Dexter Ann Arbor Road, where we now have positive dioxin results on wells immediately adjacent to that. So that doesn't appear on our map of high priority areas because, as Barry pointed out, it doesn't have adjacency. It's not a large core size. It's a nice little woodland and wetland, mature woodland, and a couple of wetland pockets adjacent to some old fields that were possibly old dumps and possibly contaminated. But so the idea is, what can we do within, as I understood it expressed, that the concern is, can we somehow use LPC to buy properties where that might be contaminated? And I guess it's not clear to me that the language really is aimed hit that from even with the insertion of protecting drinking water.
When did that suggestion come up? Was that at a board meeting?
Yes.
We all got an email about it,
No.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that I need to excuse myself for another appointment.
Thank you.
Sorry.
All right, let's the two of us talk about that and engage Barry if appropriate, but come up with a plan so that we don't have the thing stall out on us. All right, Washtenaw Land Link, I guess we don't have Tim here, but is anybody else aware of where that's going? Should we just pass over that this time until we have Tim? All right,
Well,
good.
there's a meeting scheduled for
Yeah, that's true.
the end of April, so actually probably makes sense to cover it in our next meeting.
Yeah, okay. Who plans to attend that? Yeah, I saw you were on the list, I'm on the list. Yeah. Are you?
It's on my calendar, yeah.
Will be out of town for a family memorial, so I won't be able to attend.
Okay, all right. Let's go to new business here. Barry, you brought up dedications of existing properties. What does that amount to, just quickly here?
Yeah, I just want to spend a minute on this. I want to make sure everybody was aware that we have made commitments over the years to acknowledge the names of sellers of property, either as preserves or we had a couple of requests now for easement properties. And I wasn't sure where exactly this all fell, so I just want to make sure that it stayed on our radar. Some of it may go to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, but as I jotted down the names of things, they actually ended up being 7 properties. So I don't want to lose track of these things, where at some point, often in a purchase agreement, there was a paragraph that said the family name will be acknowledged in some sort of signage on a property. And then we've now had a couple of requests from easement grantors, the April Farm being one of them. Of course, we bought that one and now have it under easement, but they had in the agreement, the purchase agreement, that we would acknowledge them at some point. And now that we've closed that deal and it's fully conserved in the hands of the Andrus Trust, that's something that we need to revisit. And then I also had a similar request from Pam Martin, who's the executor of the Wren's estate, just in a text, so not in a purchase agreement that we signed our name onto, but nevertheless, it's a reasonable request to make, and I said absolutely we will do that at some point. So just wanted to at least have an initial presentation of that. And make sure that we're acknowledging the commitments that we have made over the years.
So I would presume, Barry, that we're looking at some kind of standardized signage, which might be in conjunction with other things that the Parks and Recreation people are coming up with.
Yeah.
And that it be incorporated in naming the property, for example, on maps or official records or pamphlets or things?
Yes.
That's what we're talking
Exactly.
about.
But some of these things are easements that the Parks and Rec folks are not going to come in contact with, because they're not, the township's not going to own the property, unlike the Van Curler Preserve or so forth.
So someone needs to come up with kind of standardized representation then with recognition for the Scio Township having participated in the creation of whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true. I know on the Sloan Preserve, there's a kiosk there, and I can't remember how it exactly.
That's pretty fancy.
Yeah, but there's acknowledgement. That was a request from them as well, that I know has been satisfied in that case. And the other ones, they either haven't been, or I don't know if they have been.
Well, in the case of an easement, would that likely come from our budget and be the result of our initiative? Or is there a sign contract with somebody producing signs that the township uses? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
Who puts up those little Scio Farm signs, like this farm preserved by?
That's come out of our budget. And Erwin Martin was the one that found the vendor for that. And so we have signs, I think, in that room back there.
Oh, really?
Whether it's open space or whatever it might be, farmland. And then when we close a project, one of those gets pulled out and
So those are already prepared?
Yes.
There's nobody that we use to, because that's a nice, it's noticeable, but not overpowering.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
can we just add the name honoring so-and-so or
Yeah.
something, come up with a way to work?
That's possible to do, or it could be something different too, but we can certainly add it on to that.
We have a graphic person that we can call on to do this within the township, or is it?
I don't think it's within the township, probably the vendor who creates the signs are the ones to contact about that.
So we should contact Erwin about who he used.
Yeah, somebody else may know that, but I know that Erwin would know it.
All right, let's put a name, you're gonna do it, Barry? Yep. Great, okay, and you can report back to the next meeting about that. Thank you. Okay, we also have now use, this is something that we're not gonna get into in deep detail, but use of preserved lands for agriculture or other purposes rose out of our visit to the Jenkins property. And suggestion Barry made, and I think I agree, is we should have a little committee that looks at that whole question. I think it gets to the thing about trees and mitigation. It can get to be a vast subject if we're not careful.
I think there's also the question of chemical use, you know, if we lease out land, how we can constrain herbicides,
Yeah, it's
pesticides
the-
being applied adjacent to our preserve. So coming up with ways to limit what agricultural activities or practices could be done.
So you want to draft a policy, or what do you think?
Oh, I think a subcommittee sounds like a great idea.
Okay.
Um,
So our numbers are diminished. Probably don't want to avoid somebody who's not here, but maybe, who would you suggest for the committee, Jacqueline? I mean, I'm happy to be on the committee. I got involved with you in this conversation. So it's you and
I don't
me.
mind either, even though I'm on the other one, but yeah, I mean,
I'd be happy, I'm not quite sure I understand.
Okay, well, I think we have our committee.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
If you're present, you're on the committee.
Yeah, there you go.
That'll teach you. I'll follow up on that. And I just wanted to say that we've had a couple of inquiries for properties that we own from either adjacent or nearby farmers who said, what are you going to do with those fields? Could I possibly rent them? And I said, that's a good question. We haven't really thought about that yet, so it's time for us to
Well,
jump into that.
and it could be, what are you going to do with those fields? I've got an idea which isn't really agriculture, but does it fit within the parameters of what, you're thinking of offering? So, you want to take the initiative to pick a meeting date? It can be a Zoom meeting, I guess.
Yeah, it could be. Do people want to?
So we worked well as a committee of three on the
Four is a little
on the
problem,
RFP. The thing about four also is that it's a quorum, and so it becomes a public
oh,
meeting.
right, we can't do that.
And so with all due respect to Trustee Gordeau, if the three of us, three of you and I would be willing to do that, then we can meet as a committee and then report back to the LPC at a subsequent meeting.
Marty, we'll find a committee for you.
No,
Marty too.
Yeah, it'd be Liz, you and Marty, if that
It's
works.
Jacqueline.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You've probably got.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Got it.
I mean, I would love to be on the committee, but I'm pretty overwhelmed at this moment.
Okay. All right, so the three of us then.
Yeah, you'll be kept apprised, and of course, we'll,
Okay, all right. And you're, of course, available to consult, right?
yes.
All right.
So I will follow up with the three of you then and throw out some times where we can,
Good.
you know,
That'd be fun.
Zoom meeting or
I
personal
think it's a
meeting,
really
whatever works.
wonderful idea to look at that. How are we doing on time? 4:30, let's see, all right. Open sessions consultants report is finally your moment,
Yes.
Barry. It's been your moment for quite a bit of this meeting, but
Yes.
continue.
Some of this I've already hit. We talked about the millage renewal, we talked about NRCS staffing. We have this new RCPP federal award that was made to us collectively that's actually in place as we speak. But because of the absence of a coordinator for that program here in Michigan, the process by which we can submit applications going forward has not been established. So we've got $7.5 million of federal funds dedicated for us and other local partners, the Greenbelt, the county, and a couple of other townships, but no means to actually submit properties for consideration at this point. So in addition to the ASAP coordinator, Brian Thomas, taking the leave of absence, there's been nobody to fill the role of RCPP coordinator in Michigan. And so I'm working actually with Brian Bordage and other folks around the state to poke NRCS here to say, look, you got to pay attention to this. We've got tens of millions of dollars of funds that have been committed, and we've got properties and projects and so forth. So we really need your attention on that.
So we know who to probe, do we?
It's the state conservationist.
The one who's so overworked, right?
Maybe. He needs to have his attention drawn to this.
All right, well, squeaky wheel, right?
Yes. So in terms of properties, at the last meeting, I think it was Tim that suggested that I should go drive by the West Delhi frontage of the Burnham property, which is just north of Miller Road, that we are under contract for as we speak, and have been for quite some time. Mr. Burnham is in the process of clearing title for that. There were 3 mortgages on the property, one of which has been cleared, and one of which he actually made a personal loan to in the form of a mortgage some time ago, and then the third one, and that one is yet to be cleared. And that's what's held up our closing on that. And so when I went to that property a month ago, saw a place where a backhoe had entered the property from West Delhi Road and run over vegetation, living or not. And I didn't have permission to enter the property, so I just peered as far as I could. And it looked like there were at least one place, and I would suspect several, where that, again, I didn't see the backhoe, it looked like it was about so wide, and it just that's what a backhoe does when it runs through a wooded area. And there was one place where I could see that there was, a scoop of soil that had been removed, and looking for perk sites, in essence. So I contacted Mr. Burnham and said, what's the story? And he said that the fellow who holds the mortgage on that property wanted to see if it perked.
And is this, you should point out, this is almost flooded wet woods, right?
Yes.
So I question the wisdom of spending money to dig into a wet woods to see if it perks.
That's what was done. And apparently there weren't any perk sites that were discovered. I asked for permission to enter the property and see where the backhoe went and what other damage that it did. And he said to wait until spring because the backhoe would be coming back and filling in the holes.
Or wet spring, it's gonna really affect.
It's gonna be wet.
He'll have
Get
trouble
rid of the
getting
damage,
in.
I can tell.
And I said also it would have been nice to know that this was happening rather
Yes.
than have somebody tell us and to go and find this. But nevertheless, this is what has occurred. So I talked with Mr. Fazio about this as well. We do have the option of walking away from the purchase agreement on this property. And we also have the option of pursuing fees, or I should say coverage of costs that we have incurred in the process for appraisal and survey and environmental, up to $5,000, which we could pursue. Or we could just wait it out also and see what happens later on this year when the backhoe returns and fills in holes and I gain access to the property and we can see the extent of the damage. And as I stated, I have mixed feelings about it, but perhaps the thing to do is just to wait it out at this point, but I wanted to alert you in the meantime. This is the kind of activity Yeah, there's a requirement in the purchase agreement that the property be maintained in its condition while the agreement's in place, while we work toward closing, and clearly that's not happened here. If the easement had been conveyed and this kind of activity had occurred, it would be a violation of the easement. I don't know how far it went. This is the woods right on the corner there of Miller and West Delhi. It's mostly a scrubby woods, and so I don't think there was any necessarily significant damage that was done, but I also haven't seen the extent of it. On the north side of the property that's not visible from the road was a little older, little higher quality woods. I don't know if there was also backhoe in that area. So I guess the thing to do, unless you all think differently, is to just sort of wait and see here and where it goes. We can walk away at any time, and maybe this is just not the right time to do that yet.
Well, given the problems that we've had with him getting secure title, given all the mortgages, and our own ambiguity about does this really qualify or not, I think it ranked pretty low.
Yes.
It's probably not worth sinking a lot of our effort into, maybe if it gets really bad, we'll be doing ourselves a favor by walking away, I think, is one way to think about it.
The appraisal that we have, it's now at least 2 years old, and probably 3, was for $351,000, and they agreed to a sale price of $235,000. So there was a substantial discount off of appraised value, which was the key for us to actually get involved.
Right.
Because it was not
That's
a
right.
high-ranking, high-quality property. So at that point, there was a 33% discount. And we've committed so far $165,000, and the County Natural Areas Program has committed $70,000. And those are still in place. And we're under contract, so we're not going to pay more than $235,000. And so for the time being, we can just let it ride, and we can.
Any objection to letting it ride and see what, all right, I think we're good with that, Barry. Thanks for keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, it was disappointing. It still may be a worthwhile project, but we'll see what goes on going forward. The Loveland property, the purchase of the 21 acres of woods just down the road here on Marshall Road was completed on March 28th. As I said, they were very happy about that. Virginia said at one point that she had owned the property for 44 years. And of course, this is where they were intending to build a house at some point in the past before her husband was unfortunately killed in a car accident. And so that was one of the properties that we have agreed in the purchase agreement to install a sign acknowledging her late husband.
Oh, it would be called the Marshall Reserve.
The Marshall Preserve, correct. Not to be confused with Marshall Park. I realized that the other day, I was like, oh crap.
Can we call it the Douglas Marshall, just so that?
Yes, of course, the Douglas Marshall, yeah.
I agree with that.
Preserve.
Confusing.
Yeah, and of course, of all the names that you could have on Marshall
Marshall
Road.
Road, which again, call it Douglas Marshall, so we clarify.
It probably was named after the family then, right?
So, no,
The road?
it was not, no.
The road was not named after?
Oh, the road goes back 100, probably not 100 years, but my understanding is that all of these roads were called County Road X, 5 or 16 or whatever. And then sometime 80 years ago or something like that, the road commission started naming after people who lived on them, like Zeeb Road, is the Zeeb Farm, or the Mast Road is the Mast Farm, and Parker Road, same deal. And so there must have been somebody named Marshall on Marshall Road. It was not these folks though.
Okay.
I don't think, because they only lived for 44 years, and the naming goes back before that.
And Douglas Marshall's her husband?
Her late husband.
Her late
yes.
husband,
Yeah, so she remarried
Right,
to Mr. Loveland, to Gary. On the Wisely and Fix property, which is the 9 acres or so that we're buying on Joy Road to get better access to the Van Curler Preserve, the folks doing the environmental assessment have been backed up on things. I pushed them to get the Loveland ESA done so we could close on that one, which they did. And this one's not under any time constraint. And so I'm still waiting for that. We did execute the purchase agreement amendment on that. The land division application is in the seller's hands and has been for a while. It seems like, there's a flurry of activity and then it's silent. And I keep saying, you need this from you, and then no response, and all of a sudden they'll say, here it is, when do we close? And then finally, the Roos property, I believe it's pronounced, the 4 acres on Scio Church Road adjacent to the woods, that also closed on April 7th.
Good.
The Washtenaw County made that purchase, and we split that cost between the Greenbelt and the county and us, so our contribution was all about $30,000.
Excellent.
So that's all for the open session report. Nothing to be done, no recommendations or motions to be added, that's what I want to say.
Thank you, Barry. Been busy on those things. I think then we need a motion to go into closed session.
Correct.
May we have a motion?
I move that we go into closed session to discuss
Second, okay, made and
property
second.
evaluations.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous, okay. Let me just check to see that we have anybody